I'm Valerie, and this is Ted, and together we're going to tell you a story. It's a lovely story, and it's about the spacesuit. Now, it might just be a story, but it is actually true. And it's all about a competition that was held many, many years ago to make the spacesuit for the first moon landing. Let's go, shall we? It's all about Ellie. Ellie, when she was a little girl, she loved to sew. And in a way, she helped to change the world using only a needle and a thread. That was many years ago. When she was a little girl, she loved to design and sew things. As a child, she felt her fingers come alive the first time she used a sewing machine. She threaded the needle and pressed the foot pedal. 3, 2, 1, blast off, she felt. And the sewing machine really launched her into another universe, or so she felt. Maybe she knew what was coming next. With her sewing machine, fabric could be tucked and tapered, and the whirr of the machine fueled her imagination with loads of ideas. And she felt, with hard work, any design was possible. Isn't that good, eh? Now, when she grew up, Ellie got a job sewing clothing for women and babies. Ellie worked very, very quickly and carefully, and her seams were straight and her stitching was very neat. An engineer noticed and asked her a question. Now, an engineer is somebody who designs and makes things, and he was in the same workplace, and he had noticed how well she was sewing, and he wanted to ask her a question. I wonder what the question was, Teddy. He said, "How would you like to sew spacesuits instead?" Ellie couldn't believe her ears. "Yes," she said, "I would love to." Now, it was all to do with this competition. And the engineer said, "If we win, our spacesuit will go to the moon." Now, I told you earlier that this was a story, but also it was a true story. So there are some little fact bubbles throughout this story. So we're coming across our first fact bubble. Ellie worked for an American company called ILC, and their division, the company was called Playtex. Now, this is a very famous name because they made bras and cloth nappies. So everybody knows Playtex. I've heard of that. Lovely stuff. So, it goes on, the story. Ellie's workplace had entered an exciting competition, but at the very last minute. So it wasn't going to be easy because they didn't have lots and lots of time. So it was going to be rush, rush, rush. And here's another fact bubble. It wasn't unusual for the undergarment industry to try new things, because in World War I, they actually designed the flight suits that the pilots wore in their aeroplanes. Now, for this competition, all over the country, big teams of military designers and engineers were also competing. Ellie's team was very small, and you remember that this competition, they only entered it at the last minute. So they only had 6 weeks. So little time. And many believed that the seamstresses could never win. However, Ellie and her friends, they ignored them. Poof, we can do anything. And they set to work. Thankfully, Ellie had lots of help. Now, Ellie worked with Lenny. Now, we don't know a lot about Lenny, but we assume that he's one of the team of engineers. And some of the engineers were so impressed with the women's sewing that they asked if the seamstresses could teach them how to sew. That was a bit of a turnaround, wasn't it? And the seamstresses also shared ideas about how to make the best suit. So here was a lot of talking and sharing of ideas. Collaboration, that's good. Now, Ellie was looking up plans for old spacesuits. Now, these days, what do we do, Ted? We go to Mr. Google. But unfortunately, Ellie didn't have Mr. Google. So she went to the library and she looked up all of these old books. And she said, oh, all of these old suits, they are so hard, like armour. Oh, can't move, it's so heavy and I can't bend my arm because it's so unbendy. Surely, can we not make something that's a bit softer and a bit more comfortable? And the answer was, of course, yes. The plan was to make a spacesuit with many, many soft layers. Now, nobody had made a spacesuit like this before. The interesting thing is that for a spacesuit, they've got to protect the astronauts from the heat, because on the moon, when the sun is shining, it's very hot. And when the moon is not in the sunshine, it is very cold. So they had to find a way of keeping the spacesuit so that the temperature remained the same. And there are all sorts of other things. We needed to have holes in the suit for the oxygen pipes. We needed to have things for gloves and boots and this pressure helmet. All sorts of things had to go into making this suit. It wasn't just a suit. And they knew that no one had made a spacesuit quite like this before. The ladies got to work. They talked, they designed, they worked out what they needed to do. And so let's see where they got to. They were working very, very hard. They worked from dawn until dusk. The stitching was slow, and if they made a mistake, the whole suit had to be thrown out. And as the suits got bulkier, because remember, 21 layers, this is almost like you wearing 21 t-shirts. Imagine how bulky you would be. And they started to complain. And here's another little fact bubble. The suits got so bulky that the seamstresses had trouble feeding them through their machines. They couldn't push them in, they couldn't pull them out the other side because it was just so thick. And the little hole between the needle and the plate was so small. Oh! 2 gigantic sewing machines appeared, and the ladies named them Sweet Sue and Big Mo. And again, another fact bubble here. The seamstresses had to sew within 1/64 of an inch. I don't even know what 1/64 of an inch is, but apparently it's the width of a pin. So they worked extremely hard, and Ellie stitched late into the night, but she had Lenny by her side. And as the competition drew near, the women were exhausted, but everybody pulled together. The women sewed and glued layer after layer after layer until they had 21 layers. That is amazing. Think how fat you would be if you had 21 t-shirts on. And finally, the A7L spacesuit was created. Now, the suits needed to be tested, so they were rushed off to Texas for judging. Now, we have another little fact. Because these ladies were so proud of what they had made, before it left the factory, guess what they did? They signed their names on the inside. Yes. And off it went to be judged. They were so proud of it. So proud of it. Ah! Oh! Horror! The judges noticed, first thing they noticed was it had a broken zipper. So, Ellie and her team were given 12 hours to fix it and return it to the judges. And the suit just made it just in time. But of course, it was flown in by aeroplane, so that was helpful. But after many, many tests, the results were in. The first competitor's suit failed because the helmet blew off. Poof! Off it came. And the second competitor's suit failed because it was too fat. And the astronaut was just too bulky. He couldn't even get in through the front door of the space capsule. And lastly, the A7L spacesuit was named the winner. Whee! Terrific. Wasn't that terrific? Because it was comfortable and it was heat resistant and it was light enough to walk on the moon. What more could you want? Now, this is the interesting bit, because it was on the 20th of July 1969 when Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin walked on the moon. I remember that night. I was watching it on television. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. But Ellie and her team were also watching on television, and they were very, very nervous. Is it going to work? Is it going to work? But when she saw them pick up moon rocks and return to the capsule safely, Ellie knew that the suits were perfect. They were warm enough, they were cool enough, and the astronauts could move easily. And Ellie's little heart swelled with pride. Swelled with pride, yes. Terrific. As I say, I remember that night watching it. And you could stand on the earth looking up at the night sky and seeing the moon and thinking, oh, it's so far away. How on earth can they get a man up there and out of the spacecraft? But anyway, the earth and the moon that night felt woven together by this invisible thread. Stitch by stitch and layer by layer, the A7L spacesuit that Ellie and her friends had made changed the world forever. The end. Wasn't that a lovely story? As I say, it's a real story. Anyway, hope you enjoyed it. I think it's now time to snuggle down. Snuggle time. Go to sleep. So it's bye-bye from Daddy, and it's bye-bye from me.